in this video, we're reviewing the Akko 3084 Silent colorway, and this one does have Bluetooth 5.0, and it does not have silent switches, despite what you might think. It actually has Gateron Pink Switches, which are linear and are not silent by any means. Let's jump into that review. Alright, so I did get this keyboard sent out to me. I've been using it the past couple of days, and all in all, it is a lot like the Akko 3068 that we reviewed a while back, and you can check that right here if you want to. But in this video, we've got the 75% keyboard right here. We're gonna start with what's in the box. You do have your recyclable plastic dust cover right here, and this is convenient, but again, I don't typically use them. You can if you want to. We've also got a USB-C cable here. It's rubber, it's gray, and it has some kinks, but you know, you can straighten that out really easily. Just takes some time. You get your wired keycap puller with some Akko branding on it. Pretty convenient, easy to use. And you get some additional keycaps here in the light blue and the light purple, I guess a lilac color, for certain keys such as enter, spacebar, escape, and the arrow keys, all right here. I've already put them on the keyboard itself because without those keycaps, it's pretty bland looking, and that is why it's called the silent version. It's more of the silent colorway, very muted grays in dark gray and light gray, but with the lilac and the light blue, it's starting to look a little bit more interesting. And you get the most important part, other than the keyboard of course, is the manual. And the manual is an absolute must because these keycaps don't have any side printed legends. They don't have any of the secondary functions on them, and you're just gonna need the manual to do everything that you want to do. There are macros, there is Bluetooth, but read that manual to really figure out everything. Of course, in this video, we'll be going over how to connect your keyboard, macros, and all that onto build quality. And in the back, you see that it does resemble a ducky keyboard actually, with the way that it looks. It's got 4 rubber feet here. It's got 2 dual angle adjustable kickstands. High resemblance to the Ducky 1.2 Mini or the Ducky 1.2 SF, especially when looking at the back side. You've got this on-off slider switch here, and that is what will turn the keyboard's battery on or off to connect it to Bluetooth. To connect, it's super simple. All you do is slide this thing on, find the Bluetooth device on your computer, and then this should pop up right away. I think it's just the Akko 3084 is the name of it, plus some letters at the end, but that's pretty much how you connect. So it does connect up to 4 devices, and you do that by pressing FN and E, R, T, and Y. Definitely a weird combination, but Q and W have some other functions which we'll talk about soon enough when we get to that section. So that's how you connect. You can also connect it via the wire and turn it off to have a wired connection. It is Bluetooth 5.0 and it connects relatively quickly, but if you're playing games, there will be a little bit of latency that's very noticeable. On the top left here, you see the USB-C port, and it sits pretty flush with the board. I'm not too concerned about cables not fitting into this port. From the side view, you can see that it already has a little bit of an angle already. And another thing you can see is that it has a sort of semi-floating keycap look. Now this may be something that you like or something that you don't like, but these switches are Gateron Pink Switches, and up close you can definitely see that the housing is made of a translucent pink color for the top housing. The bottom is an opaque pink color, and the stems also. So everything is pink. But if these colors are your thing, and you like to see them, then well, by all means, check out this keyboard out. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of the floating keycap style. This isn't too intense though, it's just a little bit where you can see it. This keyboard does have white backlight, and of course we'll be going over that as well because there's a little bit of pickiness that I want to talk about with the backlight. There's some Akko branding on the front right here. It's very minimal, very small. If you use their escape key in different colors, it's also the Akko logo. But from what I can see and from using it for a little bit, it's a relatively lightweight and it's also pretty low at the front, so I don't have too many complaints about its height. It's very typical of a mechanical keyboard. You can pop a wrist rest on the front if you want to, but if not, it's gonna be okay too. The keycaps are die sub PBT keycaps, and again, like I've said, there are no side printed sub legends, but the legends are pretty clean. They are very easy to see. The keycaps themselves are pretty thick. They are OEM profile, and once you turn the backlight on, you can really see why I am picky with this, because there's a lot of light bleeding through the keycaps, especially with the light on the top 3 brightness settings. If you go down in brightness settings, you won't be able to see that bleed anymore, but then you won't really be able to see the light coming out very well at all. So it's really up to you. Some people think that it looks really cool. I personally think it looks a little sloppy with the light bleeding through the keycaps. You'll see some indicators on the board. The tab indicator tells you whether Bluetooth is on or not. And then you've got some indicators on the right here. The first one is caps lock. The second one is the battery level of the board. And the last one is whether you're in macro mode or not. And what macro mode is if you program a bunch of macros on your board, there are 2 ways to call your macros, and that's either in macro mode, which you enter by pressing FN and left Windows key, or you call them by pressing FN, right alt, and then the key that you put your macro on. But I might be getting ahead of myself. So while we're on the whole macro thing, let's talk about that. So for macros, you can pretty much put macros on every key except these 3 keys. You can't put it on FN, left Windows, or escape, because those keys allow you to enter macro mode and then enter macro editing mode. So to program a macro, you have to enter macro mode first with FN and left Windows. You hold that until the whole board blinks and that indicator on the far right of the board is white. Then you hold FN and escape to turn on macro editing mode. After that, you hold FN and the key that you want to put your macro on. Start typing away your macro, press the FN and that key again, and your macro is finished. Now you can continue on making all the macros that you want. I've made macros for AD, SF, and Q, W. I've made a ton of macros already just to test it, and it's super easy to do. On some boards where there's macro in the firmware, I have difficulty getting into the editor and trying to get it to work, and really just trial and error. But on this board, it was super simple and relatively easy to do without making any mistakes. And that's macro mode. Once you're done editing your macros, you exit the editor and then you exit macro mode. That's pretty much the only complicated thing about this board. Of course, there are a bunch of secondary functions, especially on the function row. That includes opening your browser, folder, calculator, internet, things like that. There's also media stuff, but I don't really have any of those things memorized because I never use them. All right, onto the switches. And the switches here are Gateron Pink Switches. But if you were to just blindfold me and ask me what switch I thought it was, I would seriously say they feel exactly like Gateron Red switches. They're really lightweight. They're definitely linear and they're super smooth as well. Perhaps I would say they're slightly smoother than Gateron Red, but so close that it's hard to tell them apart. It seems like just the color of the housings have changed and the stem. There's not a lot of information on these switches at all from what I can tell. I've done a lot of Google searching and on Reddit and asking my Discord if anyone has any information on these, and so far I can't find anything. And this is just what I've got from experience, is that they're a linear switch, they're lightweight, and they feel very, very similar to Gateron Reds. They're super smooth, and on this board you don't really hear much spring ping when you're typing away, and that's one of my favorite things about this board. As for stabilizers, many of the stabilizers sound pretty good except the spacebar. The spacebar has a little bit of rattle and it can definitely use a little bit more lube. From a visual inspection alone, it doesn't seem like the board is pre-lubed from the factory. but that's only looking at it from the outside looking in. I haven't taken it apart to see whether there's lube in there or not. These stabilizers are cherry style plate mounted stabilizers, and they have a red stem with a black housing, so a little bit of a different look there, and it's pretty cool. These switches themselves have the LEDs soldered sort of on top of the switch, so rather the LEDs glowing from under the PCB glowing through the switch, you now have the LED on top, and that will make desoldering this thing not very fun. If you're planning on doing that, I wouldn't even do it. This is just not very fun. You're gonna have to desolder your LEDs and your switches to get access to the PCB. They are north-facing LEDs, and they will have interference with your thick cherry profile keycaps. Good thing this board has OEM keycaps, so there's no interference to be heard. Now let's jump into that sound test now. Alright, that was the sound test, so it sounds relatively smooth, no spring ping. Onto some of this backlight stuff. So this board only comes with white backlight, and it does have a bunch of built-in effects with it. You can also change the effect speed and the effect brightness. To cycle through your white backlight effects, you hold FN and delete, and I believe there are 17 different effects, including a static white backlight. There are other functions here too, so you have Windows lock by holding FN and left Windows. You can also switch the location of your arrow keys and WASD if you hold FN and W, so very similar settings to the 65% Akko keyboard. As for battery life, it has an 1800 milliampere hour battery, and that's a lot less than other boards in the Bluetooth space that we've looked at, but the board will tell you when it's running out of batteries via the battery indicator on the top right in the middle. All in all, that is pretty much the board. It is very smooth. It's really easy to use all of its functions. The only downside, maybe I would say, is that it doesn't have any side printed legends or secondary functions on the keycaps themselves, so that makes it so you have to do some memorization or refer to the manual pretty often. But other than that, I would say it's a pretty high quality 75% board. Yes, it is mostly plastic, but the build is relatively good and there's no flexing when you apply manual pressure to the board. It's got nice feet, nice kickstands. Not many downsides other than a few preferential things where I'm a little bit nitpicky, like the semi-floating keycap look, and then maybe the LEDs being on top rather than being part of the PCB. Other than that, great board, feels wonderfully smooth. I was actually really surprised at how smooth these switches felt when typing on them, and I'm also really surprised that there's no spring ping. Again, not much information is available on Gateron Pink Switches, but you know, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. If you want to check out this board, check out the links down below. And if you're interested in a smaller version of this keyboard, check out the 65% review right here. And then maybe the best 65% keyboards of 2020 right here as well. Hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!